let's go ahead and talk about storytelling. So narrative is actually a part of storytelling, but storytelling is actually broader, where we can bring a lot of elements together and create the whole story, right? Now, each element can be explained differently using different narrative formats, but how we need to bring it all together to create a storytelling, that's what we are learning now. And how we can use it in business, that's more important. So, I have many examples to share with you. So, let's understand. So first, let's understand that what exactly storytelling in business is. Okay. So when we have a lot of data and you have very fancy, beautiful kind of visuals that you have created using Excel, or maybe you have used Power BI, Tableaus. Now you want to share it with people, right? And that sharing should be something where people can understand it clearly and buy your ideas. That's what our major idea is around storytelling. Now, this storytelling provides a quick route to human connection and influence. Influence is more important because when people hear it, they feel like that what you are saying is making sense and we should be doing something. That's what important is. And it gives some kind of fresh breath, when we have a lot of data to show. An audience can get some new perspective from our analysis. Now, the most important thing about storytelling is that storytellings are interesting, and people can remember it for a very, very long time. You just think about it. Any of your childhood memory where you were like very young, but you have read that story or somebody has told you that story. If I'll ask you, you might have some stories in your mind and you can say that as it is once again. But if I will ask you any number or anything that you have done, probably you will not be remembering that vividly or clearly. So stories are something that people remember, and that's why they will remember that why you are bringing in. That's why stories are important. Okay. And there is a very beautiful quote given by Jonah Berger, and he says that when people put their kids to sleep, nobody tells bedtime facts. They tell stories, right? Now, how we can bring that into the business, that's the most important thing. And we have 5 different ways of doing that. Of course, here again, we can use combination of those. We can put different things together to create the stories, or we can actually use one thing at one time, right? So we have this thing called context escape, then create the compelling cases with data, demystifying insights and metrics, establishing your call to action, and simple and focus. So these are 5 major things that comes into storytelling in business. Let's talk about each one of them one by one again with some examples so that you can see how you can use the data to build the stories around them. This is the first one, which is called as context is key. So whenever you think about building a story, the first thing you need to think about that why must you tell this story? What is the purpose that story serves? And what issue or problem people are highlighting? And your story should be very much linked to that specific context. Okay. So context can actually be coming from anywhere. For example, in this example, which you can see on the right hand side. So there is one organization which is called as Women Who Tech, and it is a foundation that funds women-led startups. And they conduct Women Startup Challenge that encourage more women to participate in technology. So what is the context of their mission? Women Who Tech. And it conveys through a very beautiful story that we can see here. So they have combined different types of visuals and different type of data are being presented together, where they have highlighted that areas that are underrepresented by women, the women founders who have done very well, how many number of women leaders are there, and all those things. And this data set is actually presented in form of a story where they are ultimately asking more people to come and take part in this. So the story is highlighting the context very clearly. Even if you will just look at this poster from a very distant, you will understand what it is talking about. Okay? So that's the first thing that we can have. Then the second thing is we can create some compelling cases with data. So if you have a lot of data and those data is actually giving you some insights which are surprising or something that is very valuable, you can bring cases out of that. Okay, where you can highlight some kind of trends or variables that hurt the business or can help the business, and you can make it very simple but still make it very impactful. Okay, let me give you an example. So this is a case study which is about the Aon itself. So at Aon, we have access of two unparalleled industry databases. Okay, and one is related to the compensation database, and another one is related to employee engagement database, which has the details of how employee perceive their organization and how different drivers from the compensation to work-life balance impact an employee engagement in the organization. Like a very vast data set. Now, using that data sets, we have decided to come up with this case. So, when we think about compensation, generally we think that if we will increase the salary of employees, their engagement will enhance. Like that's a very common kind of conception that we all have in our mind. Higher the salary, higher the engagement would be. However, there are some urban legends, and they says that people are not happy with their money ever. Even if you are giving them higher salary, they just feel like they're entitled to have that salary and they never feel anything about it after a few minutes. So we decided to test it out. And by plotting the employee satisfaction with pay versus their market positioning, what we found that what those legends were saying, what this cynic seems to be correct actually. The satisfaction and pay is fairly inelastic. You can see here. So people who were getting the salaries as 10th percentile in the market, their satisfaction level was 56%. And the people who were getting the salary as 80 or 90 percentile in the market, their satisfaction level was 55%. Interesting, right? So this is a kind of small case example that I wanted to share with you, and we can bring this kind of cases with the help of data. And we can tell this story that if we want to enhance the engagement or satisfaction, we need to look beyond the compensation, right? Now this is the third thing. Okay. Now let me explain you that these are not something which is steps that I'm talking about, or these are not also something that a process itself. These are some ideas that we can use, and we can use one by one or we can use combination of them, right? So this is the third idea that comes into business storytelling, which is called as demystifying insights and metrics. Okay. So instead of having some simple visuals, if you are presenting complex data structures or you have a very large amount of data to show, what we can do is we can effectively combine the visual and narrative, and we can bring the powerful storytelling by adding some kind of text on our visuals itself. Okay, like pictogram or textographics. For example, you can see here. So this is 2019 global study of engagement, and you can observe that different colors, just like heat map, that spectrum shows the engagement level of the employees. Okay, so higher the color, higher the engagement is. And once you will hovering your mouse over there, you can find out more details. For example, you can see here for India, and as soon as you will move your mouse there, it will pop out and will tell a lot of things about it, which is like more detail about that graph that you are showing. So this kind of things we can use for our storytelling and build very strong stories where we are comparing a very large amount of data and we can put it in a very specific small ways. The next one is keep it simple and focused. Okay, and I think this is the rule of analytics that we are learning from the day one, that simplest thing is the best thing, and that follows in the storytelling as well. But when we are creating these simple kind of stories or visuals, of course we have to do a lot of background work to make it look simple. Okay. So complex messaging may feel very impressive or something, but actually the impactful thing is always the simplest thing that we can do. Okay. For example, here you can say that so this is the research which is done by Aon about the 10,000 responses of Aon's Human Capital Solution Pulse survey in March 2020 during the time of COVID. And this Pulse survey provide a very clear insight into how organizations are responding to workforce challenges with the start of the pandemic. So this very simple visuals tells a lot of things about that how the workplaces are changing. So how they are moving from the mandatory work from office to the work from home, and how they are considering the canceling or postponing of this salary increases, right? So simple things bring more impact and can impress people equally without making it complex. I think that's the last thing. Last thing is about establish your call to action. Okay. So when you have a lot of data and you want to bring the story, what we can do is we can bring it in such a way where we can make people believe that they should be doing something, some kind of action is required. And we can also create this kind of understanding and urgency in their mind that something needs to be done quickly as possible. Okay. Now there's a very interesting example here, and this example is about Fitbit. You know what Fitbit is? Fitbit watches? Yes. So, Fitbit has the highest number of heart rate logged in data ever captured in the world. They have 150 billion hours worth of heart rate data. So when they have this much of data, they could actually come out with many things. But what they did was something which is actually very revolutionary. Yes. And the result is the biggest set of heart rate data used in such a way which actually made people do something. Okay. So along with this heart rate data, Fitbit has many other data sets as well. For example, age, sex, location, height, weight, activity level, sleep patterns of the people. Because every time you set up that device which you are going to wear in on your wrist, you can log in with your app, and in the app you have to add a lot of information about yourself, and Fitbit records everything. So using that heart rate data and the demographic information that Fitbit has, they come up with a very strong concept that medical science even could not identify earlier. So they introduce a concept which is called as RHR, which is resting heart rate. Okay. Now, before explaining that, let me tell you what this RHR is. So RHR is actually the heart rate, which is called as resting heart rate, and it is a predictor of early death. So if you know the your RHR number, you can identify that who's gonna die first, and this it is showing a very positive high correlation with the death results, so we can actually make it like a predictor of early death. So if your RHR is 80, your means an example, okay, you are compared to die earlier than somebody who is having the RHR 50. And if your RHR is 90, it is 3 times likely to die early compared to somebody whose RHR is 50. Okay. So as RHR increases, the early death is nearer. Okay. Now, when it comes to gender, gender means male and female. So women normally by default have higher RHR rate because women's heart tends to be smaller. Now that's what studies are saying, okay? And because the heart is smaller, they need to work harder to pump the blood in the body. And because of that, their heart is more engaged, and that's why their RHR is always by default higher. Now, the second thing that they identify is that this RHR is higher in the old age as well. Okay. But the main story was that if people have identified, so actually scientists have identified that this RHR can actually be reversed. So even if you are getting older, or even if you are a woman, if you have a strong lifestyle, you are very active, you're doing a lot of exercises and taking care of yourself, at any age of your life, this RHR can be reversed and it can come down to less than 50. So based on this, what they have concluded, that it's very important that people have a very active lifestyle, especially at the old age and especially for women, so that they can control their RHR and can have the less number of this and early chances of death. Right? So this is something that they have brought up with this 150 billion hours of heart rate data and built into a very small story, which make people realize that yes, we need to have an active lifestyle, otherwise there is a chances of early death. Okay, so this is called as the call to action, and when you have data you can bring something like this. Now bringing it all together says that you can use the combination of these things. For example, you can keep it simple but also add some cases to it. You can set the context clearly, or you can add some kind of demystifying insights into that and build your whole story that can actually make people understand what your viewpoint is, but at the same time you make them do something, right? So that's all about that, how we can use the storytelling in business.